I want to invite Alison Thorne, who is representing the campaign to free Nestora. And since Nestora has been put in jail for defending her community, this campaign has been organizing some events here in Melbourne, and we want to invite them to say a few words.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Not only am I representing the international campaign to free Nestora Salgado, I'm the Australian coordinator for that campaign. I'm also representing the Freedom Socialist Party, who is part of that international campaign. And I'd like to thank Lulu for the acknowledgement at the start. And I'd also like to acknowledge that today, as we remember the 6 dead and the 43 missing Mexican students from poor Indigenous campesino families, that we should also acknowledge that this vigil is taking place today on stolen Aboriginal land. It's now more than a month since the police, in cahoots with criminal drug cartels, killed 6 people and disappeared 43 students training to be teachers in their rural community. These students are passionate advocates for justice, and they've been targeted for their radical politics and for their desire to serve their communities. Today we are saddened and we mourn for the dead, and we stand in solidarity with the families who want those missing returned alive and who are demanding answers. But we're also inspired by the mass protests, by the militancy of the response in Mexico, and by the outpouring of global solidarity. Just Google and you will find rallies like this, vigils like this, gatherings like this happening all around the world.
Correct.
We're heartened by the 48-hour student strike, by the mass blockades of public buildings, by the actions of teachers backed by campesino groups who've taken over government buildings in multiple locations and who've staged occupations. We stand in solidarity with the thousands and thousands who've marched in both sorrow and in anger, because this determination, this resistance, is something that brings us hope. It brings us hope that the killings will stop, that the disappearances will stop, that the repression will stop, because collectively a mobilised mass movement can take on the Mexican government and can make these things stop. To get answers will require independent investigations accountable to the poor and Indigenous communities that these students came from. The Mexican state, including the authorities in the state of Guerrero, are corrupt and they serve the ruling class. They're part of the problem and they can never, never, never be part of the solution. The Freedom Socialist Party is part of the international campaign to free Nestora Salgado, and I'd like to just briefly tell people a little about Nestora. Nestora is a feminist and Indigenous leader who's been in jail in a high security prison, suffering inhumane conditions for more than a year now. And it's the very, very, very same forces that are responsible for these shocking deaths and disappearances that are the forces responsible for locking Nestora Salgado up. Nestora was elected Comandante of the community police force in her home community of Olinala in Guerrero. And in response to the drug cartel violence, Indigenous communities, in a very, very inspiring development, are reviving traditional methods of self-defence. Community police are elected by and accountable to their communities, and they are taking on the corrupt narco-capitalists that govern Mexico. Nestora was jailed for challenging these very forces as part of a wider crackdown on the much-needed self-defence movement. The campaign for her freedom is part of the broader struggle against US military aid to Mexico and the stepped-up Mexican government repression and corruption. Now, I don't have time this evening to elaborate on the growing international fight to free Nestora Salgado and the other imprisoned members of community police and other self-defence efforts, but this movement is characterising these attacks as genocide, and that's what it is. It is a form of genocide. So, to find out more, I'd invite people at the end of the vigil to pick up a copy of the latest issue of the Freedom Socialist newspaper that's got an article about the international campaign to free Nestora, available in both English and Spanish, that puts this campaign into its broader context. I'll end by saying free Nestora Salgado, free Dr. Morales and all the political prisoners, return the missing 43 students alive. We want them back alive. And we demand answers now. Thank you.